Welcome to the Deep Dive. We take your sources, unpack them, and get straight to the insights just for you.
And today, we're looking at something that, well, it really seems like a paradox in the Russia-Ukraine war.
Yeah, what's that?
It's this intensification of the fighting happening, at the exact same time as these peace talks are supposedly going on.
Right, it feels completely counterintuitive, doesn't it? Our source for this deep dive is a recent piece from Al Jazeera. It's titled, Russia's War on Ukraine Intensifies as Peace Talks Appear at Dead End. Pretty clear headline.
It is, and our job here is to really unpack what the article says going on. We want to look at the military actions, what's actually happening with the talks or maybe not happening, and other pressures like potential sanctions.
Basically, get you a clearer picture of this very complex moment based on what Al Jazeera reported.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's get into it. The article kicks off right away with this core tension. You've got direct peace talks happening in Istanbul. But the fighting isn't just continuing. It seems to be ramping up on both sides. The source even hints the talks might somehow be, well, linked to the escalation.
Which is fascinating. It suggests the reality on the ground, the military situation, is maybe setting the real terms here, defining the, very narrow space for any kind of actual dialogue.
And speaking of the military reality, the article goes into detail about this huge Ukrainian operation.
Oh, yeah, the drone operation. Spiderweb, they called it.
That name alone, it sounds pretty dramatic. Like something out of a movie.
Well, the reported scale certainly is dramatic. The source talks about 117 drones, apparently smuggled in and launched all at once, or nearly all at once, from spots near Russian airfields.
And they weren't just like hitting random spots. The targets were specific, right?
Okay.
Russia's strategic bombers.
Precisely. The big ones, Tupolev 22M3s, 295s, 2160s, these are the planes Russia uses for those massive cruise missile barrages we hear about.
The workhorses.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And Al Jazeera includes some pretty striking details from different reports. There's mention of video showing 295s just exploding, tanks full of fuel.
Oof.
Yeah. And Ukraine's SBU, their security service, reportedly claimed responsibility. They gave Ukrainian media some huge numbers, like 41 planes hit, maybe $7 billion in damage.
Wow. Those are massive claims.
They are. Zelensky himself was quoted framing it as taking out, I think, 34% of the strategic missile carriers at those bases. Now, the article does add a bit of balance.
Okay.
Mentioning the New York Times had a lower estimate at the time, maybe around 20 aircraft damaged or destroyed. So, the exact numbers might be debated.
But still, even 20 is a significant number of strategic bombers. What really jumped out at me, though, was the reach.
Oh, absolutely. The report mentions bases hit deep, deep inside Russia.
It's like way far from Ukraine.
Right. Alenia Air Base, that's up in the Arctic Circle, nearly 2,000 kilometers away. And Belaya Air Base near Irkutsk in Siberia, that's over 4,000 kilometers.
4,000 kilometers.
Yeah.
Incredible. And 295s were reportedly hit at those distant locations, too.
That's what the source says, yeah. And it wasn't just bombers. There was another attack mentioned, closer to Moscow this time, Ivanovo Airfield, about 250 kilometers away.
Yeah, what did they hit there?
An A-50. That's one of Russia's airborne radar planes, basically their eye in the sky.
Why is hitting an A-50 such a big deal? What does it do?
It's crucial for them. It spots Ukrainian air defenses, helps coordinate their own fighter jets. Think of it as a mobile command center in the air. And they're expensive. The article puts the cost around $500 million.
Okay, so losing one, especially that far inside Russia, is a major blow.
Definitely. And Ukraine, well, they were clearly proud of this. Zelensky was quoted calling it an absolutely brilliant result, an independent result of Ukraine. He even mentioned the planning time, a year, 6 months, and 9 days.
A long time in the making, then. What about Russia's side of the story?
Much more limited, according to the report. Their defense ministry acknowledged some aircraft caught fire in Murmansk and Irkutsk, but they blamed it on FPV drones, those smaller first-person view ones launched from, quote, in close proximity to airfields. They claimed other attacks were stopped and that they detained some people involved.
Which contrasts with Ukraine saying their teams got out safely.
Right, different narratives there.
So, pulling back a bit, strategically, what does this operation signify? What are the experts saying?
Well, the article cites folks like the Institute for the Study of War, ISW, and aviation analysts like Justin Bronk, and the word they use is unprecedented.
Unprecedented.
It really is. I mean, If even a fraction of Ukraine's claims hold up, this could seriously dent Russia's ability to launch those big, coordinated cruise missile salvos.
And there was another point about replacing these planes.
Yes, a crucial one.
Yeah.
Sources cited, like Rybar and Tatarigami, those well-known military analysis channels in Bloomberg, they point out that Russia just can't build new Tu-95s or Tu-22s.
They don't have the production lines anymore.
Exactly. The chassis aren't made. Plus, sanctions make getting Western parts for repairs incredibly difficult. So losses are potentially permanent losses.
That's huge. And it could force Russia to shuffle defenses around.
That's what ISW suggested, yeah. Hitting these deep bases might force Russia to pull valuable air defenses away from the front lines or other strategic spots, making them more vulnerable elsewhere.
Okay, so a really significant Ukrainian operation. But the article stresses it wasn't one-sided military action. Russia hit back hard too, right?
Oh, yes. Just before the Spiderweb operation, Russia apparently launched its biggest air raid yet, according to the source.
Biggest yet. What kind of numbers are we talking?
Huge numbers. 472 Shahed drones, those Iranian-designed kamikaze drones, plus 4 cruise missiles and 3 ballistic missiles. A massive wave.
That's an incredible amount of incoming fire. How did Ukraine cope?
Well, the report notes their defenses performed pretty well, actually. They apparently neutralized 385 of those aerial targets, including 3 of the 4 cruise missiles. Still a huge attack to absorb.
Definitely. And were there other fronts mentioned beyond these big air campaigns?
Yeah, the article touches on a few other things. There was another reported hit on the Kerch Bridge.
The bridge to Crimea. Again.
The third time, apparently, around June 3rd. Possibly using some kind of underwater drone this time. Moscow denied any significant damage, as they often do.
Okay, and what about on the ground?
This is where the article kind of balances the picture. While highlighting these Ukrainian successes, like the drone strikes, it also makes clear that Russia is still making ground advances. Persistent, though maybe marginal, gains.
Marring Ukraine's success, I think was the phrase used. Where were these advances happening?
The report flags advances near Sumy, the city in the north, as particularly alarming. It's only about 30 kilometers from the border.
That's close.
Very close. Russian forces reportedly took a couple of villages, Konstantinivka and Oleksivka, and that put Sumy city itself within range of their rocket artillery.
And they used it.
Tragically, yes. The article mentions rocket strikes hitting residential areas in Sumy. 4 killed, 30 wounded reported. Zelensky's reaction quoted was understandably furious, calling the attackers sleazebags for targeting civilians.
Awful. Were there gains elsewhere too?
Yes, mentions of seizures near Turetsk in the east, Delivka and Zorya, and pushes towards Lyman and Kurakov as well.
So it's still a grinding fight on the ground in the east and south.
Exactly. The article frames these as slow, incremental gains, part of this long push by Putin to conquer eastern Ukraine. It also mentions a reported Russian casualty figure over 200,000 this year alone.
Wow. Though the article noted that number couldn't be verified independently, right?
Correct. Always important to note the caveats with casualty figures in war.
Okay, so that's the military situation. Really dynamic, really violent. Bold strikes by Ukraine, massive Russian responses, and this slow, grinding Russian advance. How does this connect back to those peace talks in Istanbul?
Well, that's the paradox, isn't it? This intense fighting is the backdrop for the second round of talks. The first one, apparently only Zelensky showed up.
Right. So what happened this time, on June 2nd?
This time, Russia came with a formal document, a memorandum, handed it to the Ukrainian negotiators right when they arrived, according to the source.
And the demands inside, were they realistic?
Realistic? I mean, judge for yourself. The article says Russia demanded Ukraine formally give up all the territory they currently occupy in Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson.
Okay, the occupied parts?
And the parts of those regions Russia hasn't seized yet.
Wait, the parts still under Ukrainian control, too?
That's what the source indicates, yes. Basically demanding Ukraine cede huge chunks of its sovereign territory.
That sounds, well, maximalist doesn't quite cover it. What else?
Limits on Ukraine's army size. A commitment from Kyiv never to join foreign military alliances like NATO or allow foreign troops on its soil.
Standard Russian demands we've heard before.
Pretty much. And one more interesting one. A demand for Ukraine to hold an election within 100 days of signing any deal.
Why? The article suggests Moscow might want a change in government.
That's the interpretation offered, yes. Potentially linking it to a desire to see Zelensky replaced. The article also notes these demands basically echoed what Putin himself had said publicly in a speech earlier that June.
So how did the Ukrainians react to getting this memorandum?
Reportedly, they hadn't seen it before walking into the room. And given the contents, well, they left after just over an hour.
Can't say I blame them. So complete failure then.
On the core issues, yes, seemingly a total impasse. But surprisingly, they did agree on a couple of humanitarian points.
Oh, like what?
An exchange of prisoners of war, at least 1,000, maybe up to 1,200, with priority for the young and wounded.
That's something, at least.
And also an exchange of bodies, 6,000 from each side. And maybe most surprisingly, they agreed to meet again. A third round of talks scheduled for the last 10 days of June.
Oh. Despite the deadlock on the main points, they agreed to talk again.
Seems so. Ukraine's defense minister, Umarov, even suggested maybe Putin and Zelensky themselves should come next time. His quote was quite pointed. Decisions can only be made by those who really make decisions.
Making it clear who he thinks needs to be in the room. But how does Russia see these talks? Does the article give their perspective?
It does, and it's stark. It quotes Dmitry Medvedev, former president, now deputy chair of Russia's Security Council, writing on Telegram.
What did he say?
He said the purpose of talks is, and I'm quoting the article's relay of his quote here, not for striking a compromise peace on someone else's delusional terms, but for ensuring our swift victory and the complete destruction of the neo-Nazi regime.
Wow. So not exactly compromise language.
Not at all. He apparently added that the army would just keep pushing forward and destroying whatever needed destroying.
That Medvedev quote really puts the agreement to hold a third round in a strange light, doesn't it?
It certainly does. It makes you wonder what the actual function of these talks is from Moscow's perspective, if victory and destruction are the stated goals.
Right. So, intense fighting, seemingly deadlocked talks with maximalist demands. Is there anything else influencing this picture?
Yes, the article brings in one more potential pressure point. The possibility of new sanctions, this time driven by figures in the U.S. Congress.
Okay. The current U.S. President, Trump, has been holding back on new sanctions, according to the report.
That's what the article states, yeah. But it mentions Sidney Blumenthal and Senator Lindsey Graham were reportedly planning legislation.
And what would this legislation do?
It sounds pretty severe. A massive 500% tariff on any country importing Russian oil, gas, or uranium. Graham himself apparently called it the most draconian bill I've ever seen.
500%. Who would that hit hardest?
Primarily, the big buyers of Russian energy right now, China and India. The source mentions a BBC figure, something like 233 billion euros in exports to them last year.
A huge market for Russia.
Absolutely. But theoretically, it could also affect EU countries. They reportedly still spent about 23 billion euros on Russian oil and gas last year, though many have cut back massively or sought exemptions.
And what's motivating this push for such drastic sanctions now?
According to the article, Graham cited a recent trip he took to Kyiv and also a meeting with President Macron of France. It led him to conclude, in his words, that Putin is preparing for more war.
So a sense that more pressure is needed because diplomacy isn't working and the conflict might widen.
That seems to be the rationale presented in the source, yes.
Okay, so let's try and synthesize this for you, our listener. What the Al Jazeera article seems to be showing us is this really complex, almost contradictory picture.
Exactly. You've got this intense military action, Ukraine hitting deep with these unprecedented drone strikes, Russia retaliating with massive air raids and making these slow, grinding gains on the ground.
And then you have diplomacy happening, but it feels performative, almost. Russia lays down these demands that seem impossible for Ukraine to accept, basically demanding surrender of huge territories.
Right. And Medvedev's comments suggest the talks are maybe just window dressing while the real goal is military victory. Yet somehow they agree to exchange prisoners, bodies, and even meet again.
While all this is going on, you have external players, like members of the U.S. Congress, looking at the situation and thinking, we need to apply way more economic pain.
So the article paints a picture where the battlefield dynamics really seem to be dictating everything. The scope for actual diplomatic progress looks incredibly narrow, maybe limited to just these humanitarian exchanges for now. And external actors are clearly watching and considering their next moves.
It really is a volatile mix. The hard realities on the ground seem to be setting the tone completely.
Which leads us to maybe a final thought for you to consider. Given everything we've just discussed from this Al Jazeera piece, Ukraine's new deep strike ability, Russia's maximalist demands, and stated focus on military victory, why did they agree to a third round of talks?
Yeah, what could either side realistically hope to get out of another meeting right now? based on their actions and stated positions. What's the real game being played with these continued talks? Something to think about.